What's up guys, Roland here. This time on 3D NerdStop, we're going to continue to work on our R2-D2 project, and we're going to continue working on the dome. Alright guys, here you go. I'm sitting here working on the dome. Now, right now I'm actually going through, and there's little guide holes on these top little pieces here that you can put a piece of filament in, and they were a little clogged up from the way my printer printed them. So I'm just tapping them out with the drill so I can actually fit a piece of filament in it. As you can see here, I'm testing it to make sure they all fit. Because when I put it together, I want to make sure I can get all these pieces to line up with each other, and opening up the holes, making them a little deeper here and there. Other than that, put a little bit of glue in there and glue the piece in. And then cut it off at a short length. I didn't need it sticking out too long, just enough to line the two sides up when I put it together. All in all, this didn't take too terribly long to do. I'd probably say about 10 minutes in all to do the entire thing, drill the holes out, glue the two sides together, and then glue it on top. So as you can see here, I'm just letting it dry, making sure it lines up, making sure all the holes are clean, and then putting the glue on one side and gluing it together. Now here I'm trying to put a clamp on it, and well, the smart me would have figured out how to clamp this before I put glue on it, but the not thinking me tried to clamp it while I was gluing it, so it made it really difficult, and the clamps just didn't want to stay on it. I mean, I finally got two of them on there well enough that it worked well enough, but I was trying to get that other one on there and I just couldn't get it to clamp on there. It just didn't want to do what I wanted it to. But that's okay. The other two clamps were holding it just fine, and it was glued together well enough. So then I tapped out the holes on the top of the dome, which lines up with holes on all of the pieces on the top. Now see, I'm lining it up there and making sure it all sits nice and flush. Alright, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to stick a piece of plastic inside. Yeah, here I'm test fitting it to make sure the way that all the holes are drilled, they work together. As you can see, I'm just doing what I did before, putting a little glue in, gluing the little posts in place. Now I left these about, they're probably 3/4 of an inch long. I wanted to make sure I left them long enough so when I put them in the holes, then I could leave a little space underneath them so I could put glue in it. You'll see me do that here in just a second. That last one to fit in there, it didn't want to go in. The hole wasn't. That was where the two pieces were glued together. It just didn't want to open up enough. One of the pieces didn't actually even have a hole in it, so I didn't even stick anything in it, but I didn't need to because all the rest of them lined up. Now you can see here I left a little gap underneath every one. I put a little bit of glue on it, push down on it, hold it in place. Now I did have some instant spray, the stuff that you squirt on super glue, and it makes it set instantly. So once I got done with that, it's time to start sanding. Now this set of sanding, what I'm pretty much doing, I probably only spent, I don't know, maybe a half hour or so sanding on this right here, maybe 45 minutes, is I'm just trying to knock down the Z-lines. I'm not trying to make it perfectly smooth at this point. I'm just trying to get rid of the Z-lines and any other imperfections in the surface. Just knock it all down and make it a little bit smooth, but I'm not worried about making all the Z-lines disappear. That would be way too much sanding at this point, and it would probably take forever to do. So that's why we have the filler primer, which we'll use. And when we use the filler primer on it, that'll take care of all the Z-lines. It'll help fill them in, but knocking them down first helps the primer work better. As you can see, it's quite a bit of sanding. It takes a little while to get it all done. I'm not trying to be perfect with it, but I am trying to do a nice job with it. So we'll let this run through. This should only take a couple seconds, or a couple minutes. It'll only take a minute or so, and then we'll move on to the next step. Here the dome kept moving around on me, so I tried to find a way to clamp it down but the clamp was more in the way than it was helping. Checking the sandpaper to make sure it still had, that it was still rough enough to keep sanding, because the sandpaper will wear out. One thing you do have to be careful of when you're sanding the models is you don't want to leave the sander in one place too long, because it'll heat the plastic up and start melting it. So you have to keep the sander moving, and you also want to make sure you pull it off the face every once in a while and give it a second or two out in the air so the sandpaper can cool down and not get too hot. It'll do the same thing if you do it. Let it get too hot, it'll start melting instead of sanding. And ideally you want it to sand, not melt. You can see by what's facing you that it's not perfectly smooth here, but I did just knock it all down a little bit to get rid of some of the Z-lines. Alright, so now the next thing I had to do is I was using Bondo. Now this is actually Bondo, the brand name Bondo body filler. What I'm doing here is I'm going over all of the cracks, where all the pieces join together, and I'm putting a layer of Bondo over it. So if there is any gap space between the two, it'll fill it in. So when we go to paint it, you won't see these lines. Now this is the first time I've ever used Bondo, and I was, it dries pretty quick. I mean, it starts to set up pretty quick. But the way it is, you have one compound, and then you have to add the hardener to it. You mix the two together, and then you apply it to whatever you're using it on. Now, in the Georgia heat that I had that night when I was working on this, I got about 1.5 to 2 minutes before the Bondo started to set, and it was no longer workable. So at first I was trying to be really careful and get it on just right, and then I learned I'm going to go back and sand it anyways, so just get it on there and let it make sure it covers what I need it to cover, instead of trying to make it really, really smooth like somebody that's done this for years and years and years would have. I just went in and got the stuff in where I needed it, so I didn't have to worry about it. So I just made sure I covered the cracks well. You will notice on this one, I believe it is, yes, that I do the side of him, and then I go up and I hit the top. Now if you notice, that's the seam that goes all the way across. I forgot to do the other side. I just missed it when I was doing this, and I noticed it when I started doing all the primer and sanding. So at the end of this, once I get done with all this, I'm gonna have to go back and fix that one side. Okay, as you can see when you look at the side of it here, that it's not, the Bondo job's not pretty. I mean, it's on there, it's caked on there. I tried to make it thin and smooth in places, and it'll all sand down. I mean, when I sand it down, I'm pretty much going to sand almost all of it away anyways. But I wanted to make sure it filled in the cracks real good. You only have so long to work with it because it was really hot that night. The stuff was drying really quick. I mean, it was not giving me a whole lot of time to work with it. But I managed to get it on there, managed to make sure I covered the crack from top to bottom. I did miss one seam across the top, but I'll have to come back and fix that later. So that's as far as I got that day. About a week later, I got back to it, and now I'm sanding all the Bondo down, and I'm using 100 grit sandpaper here. This way it'll knock it down fairly quick, but leave it fairly smooth after I get done knocking it down. I'm just I'm sanding the Bondo down to the point that I can see the plastic through it. Not getting rid of all of it. I want to make it to where if there was a height difference between the two pieces of plastic, that it fills in that and goes smooth across the two, so you don't see the gap there. As you can see on this one piece, the first part that came around here to the side, you can see how I left more on one side than the other because one side was higher than the other one. So by doing that, it leveled the two sides off, and I just tried to level it off as much as I could going around the dome. So when you ran your hand around it, it felt smooth all the way around and kept the dome shape without distorting it too much. I would say this sanding probably only took me about 20 minutes maybe. It wasn't that bad to do this. The 100 grit sandpaper took the stuff down real fast. Made it real easy to work with. So I got done sanding it. I wiped it off a little bit, then I had to go back with a knife here. And all the places where it got over the edges or whatever, I cut it off so it was left smooth edges and clean cut pieces. And you can see right there and right in front of you, oops, just spin it a little bit, where it's kind of stuck in the corner. That's what I'm going through and cutting out. Popping all those pieces out of the corner, taking it out of all the places where the blue pieces will go on this model. So I'm just cleaning it up here real quick. Some places had a little more than others and took a little while longer to clean up. But I'd say all in all I spent maybe 10 minutes doing this. I mean, I wasn't trying to rush through it. I was trying to make sure I got a nice clean job of it. Alright, there we go. As you can see I'm wiping it off now. I'm going to get up real quick, and I went and ran into the kitchen to grab a wet paper towel so I could wipe it all down and get all the dust off of it, because I'm getting ready to put the first coat of primer down on it, so I want to clean it up. As you can see on all the seams, there's a little bit of level difference in the plastics on all of them, so that's why you see a little bit left on everywhere. But as you can see, I took the majority of the Bondo off while sanding it. Okay, so I set up in the driveway to try to paint it, and I made the one mistake of doing this outdoors this day. It was really windy out there, and the wind kept changing direction on me. And every time I would try and spray it, the wind would just blow it away, so I had to spray closer to the model than I wanted to be to try and get it to even hit the model. I mean, it was terrible trying to spray paint out there in this weather and this wind. It was a gorgeous day out. It was just really, really windy out. So I did the best I could for the first coat. I wasn't that worried about it. It's the first coat. I'm going to do more than one. So the first coat, I wasn't that worried about it. As you can see, I just kind of got it on there, got it started. You can see here how it's a really rough coat. And it really was. It had all kinds of little balls and beads all over it from the way the wind blew it around on itself. As you can see here, now I'm sanding it down. Now I sanded this down fairly quickly. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. I wasn't worried if I ate through the paint down to the plastic, because just because I could see the Z-lines, as long as I couldn't feel them, is what you're going for. It doesn't matter that you can see them, as long as you can't feel them. The one thing I did find out doing this is the primer has a tendency to clog up the sandpaper really, really well and really fast. So you have to go, I went through quite a few sheets doing this. More so on the second priming than the first one here. The second coat of primer, I put it on a lot thicker, trying to get it to fill in the cracks better, and you'll see that here in a minute. But as you can see, it wasn't hard to do. It was rather easy to do this. It was just a little time consuming. See, changed one sheet out there. So I got done with the first sanding. Wipe it down with the microfiber cloth. As you can see, it looks pretty good here. You can see some of the places where the Bondo came back through, and you can still see Z-lines on it in places. Sadly enough, you can still feel them in most of those places too, so I decided when I did the second coat, I needed to get it on there a little bit thicker to help fill in those Z-lines. I needed to make them all disappear with the primer coat. It worked well. The one problem is it did take longer for the primer to dry this way because I put it on thicker. I maybe should have put a real thin coat on, let it sit for 20 minutes, come back and put another thin coat on. But like I said, this is the first time I've ever done this part of ever working on a model as far as finishing. So I got it on here a little thick in places. But the nice part is I know I'm going to sand it all back smooth anyway, so I'm not too worried about that on this part. Here the can's running out. So it did take one whole can of primer to do it. Okay, I let it sit for about an hour and a half or so to dry. And I came back and started sanding it again. This sanding took a little longer than the first one because it was so, the primer was so thick on there, I really ate up some sandpaper. Sadly enough, this is as far as I got with the model, was sanding it here. Once I got done with this sanding, I was out of sandpaper, and it still needs a little bit more before I go on to the next coat. So I have to wait for some sandpaper to come in. As you can see, I'm really concentrating on making sure it's getting smooth and knocking it down, and trying to make sure you can't see any blemishes in it. I mean, you're going to see some, and it really isn't that important in this coat as long as there's no seams. If you can see a seam of some sort, it'll show up in the final coat. But if you can just see some lines, as long as you can't feel them at all, it shouldn't show up in the final coat. Okay guys, I got a quick question for you here while we watch this sanding. Now if this is too much detail for y'all on the build process, that's fine. Just give me a thumbs down on the video and I'll know that y'all think I'm doing too much detail. If you like the amount of detail I'm giving you, give me a thumbs up on the video, and I know I'll keep that up. Okay, so I'm pretty much out of sandpaper at this point. Sandpaper's on, it's pretty much worn out. I'm just inspecting it to see how much is left. Gonna wipe it off real quick. And that's where we're gonna be with the dome for now. There we go. Alright guys, I got one more question for you here. I got a straw poll for y'all to fill out. How much detail would you like to see with the electronics? Alright, your 4 choices are very detailed, show you how everything works, and explain the code to you. I will be using Arduinos and stepper motors and all kinds of motors and servos and stuff throughout this project, so how much detail would y'all like to see about the electronics? You can pick moderate, or I can show you how everything works and show you the code but not explain it to you. You can do minimum, where I show you how it works but I don't show you the code, or you can say none, where I just show you R2-D2 doing what R2-D2 is going to do instead of what I put into it as far as what electronics are in it. So I'll leave that up to y'all to decide how much of that detail you would like to see. And like I said before, if you would like to see less detail about the finishing process, that's fine. Just give me a thumbs down on the video. If you'd like to keep it the same or see more or whatever, you can give me a thumbs up and then leave a comment down in the description below. Or just leave a comment down below. Thank y'all for watching. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. You can also check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the description down below. Until next time, have a great day.